An 87-year-old man walks slowly up a barren hill in a Colorado cemetery. On the hilltop, the wind blows through a wire fence and across the forgotten graves, now covered with sagebrush, weeds, and cactus. After a while, Wayne Patterson finds what he is looking for: the grave of Luis Manchi, buried in 1967. Patterson took his life.
Well, it's not very pleasant to go over that. It's a long time gone.
It was Friday night, 8:04 to be exact. Patterson put his hand on a metal lever, and when he pulled it, the gas chamber in the Colorado State Penitentiary was filled with cyanide. 16 minutes later, Manchi was dead. Patterson was the warden at the state pen. It was his job, a job that ran contrary to the beliefs of his own mother.
I had 5 men condemned at that time, and she wrote letters to all of them. She was an implacable foe of the death penalty.
And here her own son is the one that the state of Colorado charges to carry it out. From the hilltop, Patterson has a clear view back to the Colorado State Penitentiary where these men served their time. Some men died of old age after serving a life term. Others died violent deaths in fights or riots. Many were executed.
And nobody wanted him, so we buried him over a long period of time right here in this general area. They used to call it Woodpecker Hill because all of these were wooden crosses originally, and periodically were painted white. But the woodpeckers ate the wood, and they finally had to go to metal.
Old rusted metal markers show the location of the hundreds of graves on the hill. Some do contain names, but most simply say Inmate, CSP, Colorado State Penitentiary. There are, in fact, only a few tombstones.
Anytime you see a tombstone, it's usually a collection that prisoners liked him very much and took up a collection and made a marker for him. But it was prisoners rather than family or anything.
The metal marker on the grave where Patterson stands is filled with bullet holes. It is the grave of Luis Manchi.
Well, they've just used it for target practice and shot several times, not only Manchi's marker, but other markers around, but particularly his, which indicates it's somebody that had a feeling about it.
The hundreds of graves are unkempt. The prison abandoned the cemetery in the 1970s. A cold wind blows over the graves of robbers, rapists, and murderers.
I knew personally a good many of these people along here. One of them right up there was completely insane for probably all during my time here. Others, there's several along here that were executed.
Someone has put fresh dirt on the grave of Frank Chadwick to cover the depression caused by the wooden coffin collapsing. Patterson walks down the row of markers, past graves overgrown with sagebrush, weeds, and cactus. He walks past a rotten wooden cross that marks the grave of Charlie Jones. The men are buried with a view of the pen where they did their time. Some ended up here after serving life sentences. Others died violently in fights or the brutal prison riot of 1929. Many were executed, but they have one thing in common. No friend or relative even wanted their body when their life was ended. Patterson says, in spite of laws to the contrary, some of them were tortured in their own unique way.
Some people were tortured and guilt-ridden as they went along through, and most cases they weren't evil animals like people say. They were pretty much people, same as anybody else. Some of them were terrible. Stomp your life out like you're an ant on the floor if they got a chance. But very few of them are ever executed. It's usually somebody like him.
Patterson stands over the grave of the only man he ever executed.
Insurance salesman, a perfectly normal guy, had an incestuous relationship with his daughter, and when it was going to be exposed, why, he killed a lot of people of his family.
Manchi had a pregnant wife and a total of 10 children.
He killed 4 of his family, his wife and a daughter and 2 of the children. There were about 7 or 8 children. he ran out of willpower to kill the rest of the family and quit. And of course he was sentenced to be executed by lethal gas.
Up until 1934, the state used hanging, or stretching as the prisoners called it, to kill the worst of the worst. 45 men died that way, but in 1967, death came not on the gallows, but in a chamber filled with cyanide. Even as Manchi faced that death, the members of the family he devastated did not abandon him. As Manchi prepared for his walk to the gas chamber, 4 members of his family were in the graves he sent them to.
But the balance of his family stayed with him the rest of his life, and they were here and had his last meal with about 4 of those kids who were grown, high-class kids and people, good, fine folks.
Patterson says that Manchi was one of those who was tortured and tormented. He did not even oppose his own death sentence.
He refused any legal help whatsoever. In fact, I always had the feeling that the state assisted in a suicide as far as I could see.
But that didn't matter. As warden, it was Patterson's job to take the life. And even as he prepared to do so, his own mother, a staunch opponent to the death penalty, was writing letters of support to all the prisoners on death row, including the man her son would execute.
You die in prison, it's a pretty dismal outlook.
Patterson says that he didn't have any problem with the execution, that everyone in the state that voted in favor of the death penalty had their hand on the lever. Prison records detail what took place that Friday night in June of 1967. At 8:04, the warden pulled the lever that dropped the cyanide pellets. A minute later, gas vapors appeared. At 8:07, Manchi was coughing with very little movement of the body and his head jerking. At 8:09, the prisoner was apparently unconscious, and 8:20, he was declared dead. He was later buried with all of the other unwanted prisoners from the state pen. Patterson says there are lessons to be learned on that hill.
They give you a little cause to pause and reflect that life is pretty short and narrow is the corner in which we live. Most of these through here were unloved in life and unmourned in death.
And so they remain on a windswept, desolate hill near the Colorado State Penitentiary.